In this video I'm going to be using this sort of half kit that I got in a bunch of second-hand stuff to make an abandoned car vignette. So I've got a shell and a nose cone and some of the interior and some of the base plate, so we'll see what we can make with it. First thing I wanted to do was mask off the headlights, because whoever had this before had already put some of the lenses in and painted the surrounds black, so there's no need to repaint any of that. So it's just a case of putting some masking tape on, cutting it back with a knife until I was happy with it. There we go, that's ready for paint. So first thing I did was cover up the purple with some Vallejo light rust, and I wasn't trying to get even coverage, I'm trying to create tone variation, because if you paint rust all in one colour, as I found out the first time I tried it, it looks really cheap and fake. It looks very toy-like. So I'm going heavier in some places, lighter in others. So once that was dry, I took some water-based chipping medium and a piece of sponge and just started working around the body, trying to create some chip marks and sort of heavy weathering areas. I'm going to be doing this in multiple layers, so I'm not worried about getting a perfect sort of pattern with this. I'm just going random and seeing what looks good and where I think heavier chipping would have occurred, sort of on edges, and then on like the large flat panel of the bonnet. That's obviously going to get lots of wear because water and things are going to sit on there. For some of the edges, like the shoulder line and around the doors and things, I took a little brush just to create sort of larger areas where things would be wearing through and dripping down, that kind of thing. Once that was dry, it was back in the booth and I laid down what's going to be the base colour of the car, which is signal blue. And again, same with everything else, I'm not going for an absolutely perfect finish here. I'm trying to create variation, heavier patches, lighter patches, where things would have worn at different rates over time. To get the chipping medium off, you just use some water and a brush. So I'm just working my way around the car, pulling off areas where I want to see the rust come through. The more you work it with the brush, the more it will pull off, so you can have sort of some control over how heavy weathered an area is going to be. Again, after the water was dried, I'm taking some more of the chipping medium and I'm covering up the areas that I like and creating new chipping points with a large brush, and again with a small brush and the sponge like I did before. And it's back in the booth for a mixture of Vallejo metallic rust and Vallejo light rust. I was sort of mixing and matching between the two, putting it on in patches and stages, just trying to create some texture and colour variation. Then once it was dry, repeat the process again with the water. You can see here you've got the differences between the metallic and the non-metallic paints, giving you some texture variation. Now pull back with the water to reveal the chipping underneath that we protected. With the shell dry, it was time to add some weathering powders. These are the Revell ones. And the first thing I wanted to try was using the white snow powder to create some highlight points, just to create some variation in colour and contrast. And then going over the top of them with the browns and rust colours to unify it to the body, so we get darker and lighter patches. And it was just a case of doing that all around the body until I was happy with how it was looking. For the interior, I know most of it isn't going to be seen, so I just thought I'd try working some of the sand and dirt powders into the bare black plastic, just to see if I could get that sort of old dusty interior plastic look. And it came out quite well. For a quick weathering technique, this turned out pretty good. I especially liked how the seat came out. I used a little Tamiya extra thin cement just to piece the interior that I do have together. And I use some of the weathering powders on the glass, because if the car's going to be sat for ages, the glass will fill up with dust and dirt and fade over time, so I wanted to replicate that. Quite happy with how that came out. It's got that kind of yellowing old glass look. The last thing on the body was to take some black panel wash and work that in around the vents, on the panel edges, and in some of the deeper rust areas, just to get that grimy, left for ages kind of feel. On some of the parts of the body, I used a little extra thinners to water down the panel wash, so I could spread it around a bit more to give more of a general grime rather than a heavy dirt look. For the centre badge in the front, I decided to use a little bit of acrylic marker just to give the remains of a badge. Then it was just a case of putting everything together, a little bit of PVA glue to hold in the glass. I also had these tyres I thought would be good to use sort of as dressing pieces, and I did the same thing I did with the body, using the white snow powder first to create light and dark patches, and then one of the darker mud colours over the top to give a dirty, used old tyre kind of look. I think they came out okay, quite happy with that. Then on to making a small base, so I could try some different techniques out. I made up some poor man sculpt mould with some plaster of Paris and chopped up toilet roll, and spread that over the base. Just with my fingers. I wasn't worried about making a perfectly smooth area. This is meant to be like a bit of grubby old mud ground. That's how it ended up, and then all I had to do was wait for it to dry. Then we were ready for paint. Just using some regular craft paints, using I think 3 different types of brown just to create some variation. For some grass over the mud, I wanted sort of a rough kind of look, so I took some of this static grass that I got from the local model shop and a puffer bottle and loaded it up with 2 or 3 different lengths and gave it a good shake. Covered the base in just your regular PVA glue. And then it was just a case of shaking and sort of puffing out different amounts of grass to create a sort of mottled scrubland kind of area. Once that was done and dry, I just wanted to add a few of these little rocks. In hindsight, I think if I do this again in the future, I'd try and use several different sizes of rocks. Then to fix them in place and to create some sort of muddy, swampy-ish places, I just used a mixture of PVA glue and water on a dropper bottle. Once it was dry, the rocks seemed a little bit bright and clean, so I used a bit more of the panel wash just to dull them down a bit and give them some variation in colour. I also used a little bit on some of the areas of grass and some of the darker mud patches, just again to give that variation. I've been watching a lot of terrain builders on YouTube and they all say that large areas of single colour are what let things down, so I'm trying to avoid that. I wanted to make a sort of old tarpaulin that would have been on the car, remnants of it being covered up once upon a time. So I used this piece of shopping bag, just scrunched it up and then cut it down and worked out where I wanted to lay it on the back. I used a little bit of PVA glue underneath just to set it in place so that it wouldn't move as I was brushing it, and then brushed over the top with regular white PVA school glue. Decided this side was a little long, so I got out a blade and cut it back. Bit more glue on the back there just to get that to sit down, because a real tarp over time would have been weathered down with water and have more weight to it than a flimsy piece of plastic cloth like this. So just trying to get the glue to make it sit in some sort of realistic fashion. Then it was a case of some blue paint just to give it sort of remnants of it being a coloured tarp that faded over time. So a rough brushing with that, and then a quite heavy brushing with some panel line wash mixed with thinners. Just a case of putting everything together now on the base, using the tyres as decoration, and decided to put one tyre on the roof and then the others on the steel wheels I had, put them underneath. Kind of idea for this was that it's a shell that's been abandoned and all the good bits have been stolen off it over time, that kind of thing. So there we go guys, that's the finished little vignette. I wasn't really setting out to make anything special here, it was just to test some ideas and have another go at doing rust and see if I could do that better. Pretty pleased with how it came out. I think I can use some of these techniques going forward with a more substantial project in the future, and I'll see you in the next one.